Welcome to Volunteering to Enhance Your Career, sponsored by the ABA Career Center and free to its members. Moderating the program today is Kathy Morris. Kathy is founder of Under Advisement Limited and former director of career counseling and placement for Northwestern University School of Law, former director of the ABA Career Resource Center and the Center for Continuing Legal Education. She has decades of experience with guiding law students, lawyers, and law firms, focusing on attorney training and professional development. Kathy, you may proceed with the program.
Thank you, Bonnie. I'd like to welcome all of you to our December program of the ABA Career Advice Series, which we timed in case you're contemplating giving back this holiday season, of course, and beyond. I have the pleasure of introducing our two faculty members again. We have two lawyers with us who both make their careers squarely in the arenas on which we're focusing today. We have Adam Friedl, and Adam was serving the public good even before he went to law school. He then became a public interest lawyer, worked for Appleseed in New York, which we're going to touch upon again later in the program, and Adam is now the Program and Special Initiatives Manager of Pro Bono Net. He's an Oklahoman. He works in and he comes to us today from New York City. Jessica Ryckman is the Deputy Director of Lawyers Without Borders, which is a U.S. NGO, non-governmental organization that promotes the rule of law around the world. Jessica was a D.C.-based big law associate before she took time off to volunteer, and now, full-time with Lawyers Without Borders, she manages the Trafficking in Persons program in Liberia, as well as its Kenya programming. So how cool is all that? Let's start with a quick run-through of the agenda if you've been on the series before, which we hope you have and will again. First, we talk about some of our significant issues and tips on the topic. We have the conversation and questions from you with the faculty. We have an agree-disagree moment where we ask the faculty to quickly say whether they agree or disagree and why about a certain subject. Again, we like your participant questions coming in all the way through the program. We can't always get to all of them, but we try to incorporate as many as possible. And we have our takeaways and give you some special resources of the ABA. So with that said, I would like to toss it out to, I think, Jessica. Let's start with you. In addition to helping people in need and doing good, as they say, with volunteering, what are some of the benefits for the lawyers who volunteer?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me today, Kathy. There's many, many benefits to lawyers who are going to volunteer. You are going to grow your legal knowledge, sometimes in different substantive areas, perhaps international law, FCPA, or growing markets. You might also grow your knowledge of different areas of the world and how legal work is there. So, for example, in Africa or Asia, by doing some international pro bono work, you're going to make a bunch of professional connections. You're going to meet other people who are doing this work and who are interested in this work. We often travel, for example, with judges and teams from both law firms and private practitioners. So you're going to meet folks from around the United States doing this work as well. You're going to improve your practice skills by learning about issues as you face them on the ground. And you're also going to get a change of pace. You're going to experience life from a different perspective and get a real chance to work with non-lawyers as well. So there's a lot of benefits to volunteering.
Adam, do you want to chime in too with that?
Sure. Thank you for having me as well. It's a real pleasure to be here. I would say that I would divide the benefits into sort of two categories. One are the more tangible ones. Jessica mentioned some great ones, gaining new skills and getting new knowledge. I would also say that you typically get a lot more experience working on pro bono cases and a lot more responsibility than you might in your paying practice. I think it's pretty common for associates to spend years in the office before they might go into a courtroom, but in most pro bono cases, you're really in the trenches, and that can be really valuable experience.
Yeah, I guess unless you're a solo lawyer, and we have a lot of those on the phone with us today, they're pretty much in the trenches. But there's also all these additional benefits, as we've mentioned, for them. And also, I think, Adam, as you mentioned, these tangible benefits about this wider exposure and more responsibility, really great for new lawyers and even law students. So you said there were some intangible benefits too?
Yeah, I always like to point this out when I talk about pro bono with folks. I think that as lawyers and law students, we get in this mindset of saying, it's doing good work is it's important to do good work, but what can we get out of it too? And I think that's that's an important question, but I don't think we should take the first part for granted. Doing sort of good work is really, really important and makes an enormous difference in people's lives. A lot of these cases, you may have the opportunity to, save someone from eviction or keep someone's family together, and that can be incredibly rewarding in itself.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making that point. I mean, I think we all agree that's really, really important. And, that's why I say, especially at this time of year, to, refresh yourself, but also take seriously one of the reasons we became lawyers, I think, to help people, and don't always get a chance to do that in our day jobs. Now, in terms of the job market, I wanted to also follow up with that as an actual benefit for lawyers who volunteer. And here, let me harken back a second to the program description, because I wanted to remind our listeners, we found this recent survey, and it said an impressive 41% of employers said that they had considered volunteer work as important as paid work, when they look at people's resumes. And also 20% said they had actually made a hiring decision based on volunteer work. So I want to ask you each, in terms of how volunteering can affect your career, maybe let's have you illustrate, if you each would, with an example of how volunteering can weigh in terms of the start of your career, or even later on. We have people listening across the spectrum, how it can make a difference to the course of your career. I guess, Jessica, let me start again with you and ask you do you have a story that kind of illustrates the relationship of volunteering and career pathing?
I do, and in fact, I have a story about a woman who volunteered with us, who's actually Kenyan and volunteered with us in Kenya. She was actually a participant in a Lawyers Without Borders training program, and she gained a lot of confidence, and she was a private lawyer. She said that, she really appreciated the program and she wanted to give back. So she came back the next year and trained with us to be a trainer in our program. And when she trained in that next program, she actually garnered the interest of the Judiciary Training Institute over there, who really noticed her as someone who was using her time to give back and to enhance the bar. And they encouraged her actually to put her name in the ring to be a high court judge in Kenya, which she did, and she is now a high court judge in practicing in Nairobi, and she is also someone who still participates in pro bono and continues to give back through both the Judiciary Institute and our programs. So, that's a case of both pro bono helping her career and then her turning around and helping others as well. So it's been a wonderful story for us.
And I guess for the listeners, that is an amazing story. But also, since we're using the term pro bono now, I want to make sure everybody is on the same footing with us, because pro bono obviously is a Latin phrase meaning for the public good. And when we lawyers refer to it, we're often talking about, in the legal context, performing legal work at no cost or at a very low cost fee for people who are not otherwise able to higher representation. And we're going to talk about how volunteering encompasses more than that. So we're kind of covering a number of grounds today. But Adam, I don't know if you can top Jessica's story, but let's see what you have to say.
I will concede that I have never directly helped make anyone a judge, but I have seen pro bono affect people's careers, in a lot of different ways. And one example that comes to mind is I had the opportunity a few years back to supervise a pro bono program, and I got to work with a lot of lawyers and law students who would volunteer their time to come in and represent folks who are being sued for credit card debts or other kind of consumer debts. At times it was mistaken identity or various issues. And I really saw both that courtroom experience, the experience interviewing clients, negotiating with opposing counsel, and things like that, really was valued by their employers or helped them to get jobs a little bit down the road. And I also saw folks that, really were so affected by the work that they sort of changed the direction of their career. Maybe they thought they had entered law school planning to do something corporate or more transactional work, and they decided to go more of a nonprofit route. So I think the advantages for your career are really substantial.
I mean, Jessica, that's good too, Jessica. I think actually it affected your career so directly.
Yes, that's true. So I actually started off as a volunteer who was working for a big law firm and took some time to volunteer in Liberia on human trafficking issues, which inspired me to redirect my own career to work more on these issues. But even if you stay in your current line of work as a solo or with a firm, volunteering can bring a lot of new perspective. It can add meaning. It can motivate you. I think one thing we keep hearing from our volunteers is they get back in the office and they're so inspired by the work that they've done. It really helps to motivate them and regenerate their devotion to their clients and their organization. So I think that there's a lot of different ways that can work out.
Well, I that makes sense. I mean, Pro Bono Net, I think also does that too. I think, Adam, helping sort of affect the career, even if you stay where you are in other ways.
Yeah, we definitely try. At Pro Bono Net, our overall mission is to use technology to increase access to justice. And we do that in a number of different ways, but one of the big ones is providing tools and resources for lawyers to be able to feel more confident in the pro bono work that they do and find opportunities to do it. So, we develop things like document assembly platforms that will help a pro bono attorney sort of walk through the creation of a pleading or a document for a client, especially if they're not familiar or this is not the area of law that they practice every day. It can really, I think, really help them to sharpen their skills and make sure that they are giving the client the best service they can.
Speaking of that and tech, I mean, it occurs to me too that, a lot of lawyers, may not want to use their volunteer time doing things, that they kind of do during the day. They might want to do, something different. So let's talk about that in terms of asking you about some kinds of volunteer work, like using technology, as Adam mentioned, to help others that is not this traditional pro bono lawyering. Can we kind of broaden the discussion a little bit that way? Adam?
Yeah, sure. I think that there are a lot of opportunities to contribute to help folks in a, at least tangentially legal way without doing sort of traditional pro bono representation. Just sticking with technology for a minute, we work on, we develop new apps and new programs to do various tasks. One that we worked on recently with some great students at Georgetown Law was an online screening app, and it allows social workers to go out and do basic legal screenings for their clients and really help them understand who needs to get referred to a lawyer, who has urgent issues. And that that was basically built by lawyers and law students using that background legal knowledge, but also doing something completely different, basically building a computer program. So I think that there are lots of different ways to help.
Right, and if you don't mind, I jump in, Kathy.
Sure, go ahead.
I know lawyers who volunteer at animal shelters, for example, to have a completely non-legal experience. They obviously, animals are restorative, and it's wonderful. So they get an altogether different kind of experience. But at Lawyers Without Borders, we also have other opportunities besides, things that you would expect to do in your office day to day. For example, in Liberia, we have had international people who travel with us and volunteer internationally teach children about trafficking and gender rights through the use of educational games and coloring books. So that's just one example of things that are outside of the realm of your normal day-to-day practice. We also have other non-practice opportunities to work with NGOs, and there's many different activities.
Is an NGO different from a nonprofit? Because I hear the term, and I'm not sure everybody really knows the answer to that.
Generally, in my experience, people who work internationally refer to them as NGOs, and people who work domestically tend to refer to them as nonprofits, but essentially they're the same.
Ah, that's interesting. That helps me. Also the ABA has a lot of referral sources for legal services, and I guess I'll say nonprofits and international NGOs and whatnot through its legal services and its international divisions and callers. I know it's something you can find out by getting on the ABA website and looking at those two sections or divisions, but also just generally seeking pro bono volunteer opportunities through the ABA. There are plenty of them in the U.S., and they have some really cool programs internationally as well. And sometimes, actual jobs in those things too, because, we're talking about volunteering, but we're also identifying things that can lead to careers in this arena. And somebody asked one of our callers where she could find the report about the employers who consider volunteering when hiring. I have to say I read that in an article, but I didn't sort of catalog the article. And what I want you all to do in this program and every program is, yes, we've got a couple of course materials to go along with the program, but we don't, mean by any stretch to be even close to comprehensive in that, just to give you a flavor for articles, blogs, referral sources, etc. But please feel free to, just after every program, kind of look on the web, expand what you can find. It's so easy these days. There's just so much information. And I think, of course, Adam and Jessica, I think you could each talk about the referral sources that you guys afford through your organizations.
Of course. There are a lot of other organizations that do international pro bono work. There is a list that's part of the course materials, I believe, that we help supply, but there's Appleseed, for example, works in the U.S. and Mexico and has wonderful programs. There's iPro Bono and the International Bar Association, the International Senior Lawyers Project. The list goes on, and there's many different programs and organizations, and they each have a slightly different niche that they fill, and that there's many different opportunities. So if you're interested, it makes sense to think broadly and explore the opportunities at several different organizations.
And I think if the listeners get the course material, they can look, because I think you provided us, sort of a starter list, right, in terms of some of those sources. Right, Jessica?
Yes, we did. And also I would mention, too, on the international front, if you speak a foreign language, there's also additional opportunities usually to do legal pro bono work. In terms of your flexibility, that's one thing that we always like to ask about. And so consider that, too, as someone who speaks if you speak multiple languages and you're a lawyer, so you understand the terms of art and things like that, any amount of time you can volunteer is really invaluable to many of our organizations.
I mean, that's interesting because I think, let me ask you if you're saying, too, that sometimes there are these international volunteering operations, but doesn't mean you have to travel. Doesn't mean you have to take time and go outside the country, that there are things you can do here that are international related, like using your language skills. Did I hear you right?
Of course, yes. A lot of the lawyers we work with, may not have the ability due to work obligations or family obligations to spend a few weeks out of the country, and there's always work that can be done, desk work or work that can be done within the United States in terms of research and writing, and a lot of times creative thinking too, using your legal knowledge to really think. I mentioned previously the coloring books and games that we sometimes use to teach children about important legal concepts. Well, a lot of that kind of work does happen on the U.S. side, so you don't necessarily have to travel to do what will end up being international pro bono work.
Ah, okay, that helps. So Adam, did you mention that Pro Bono Net has lots of referral sources? I think that's one of your reasons for being, but can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to. I just wanted to mention before we do that to follow on Jessica's point, foreign languages are also an enormous asset when doing pro bono domestically as well. If there are always clients who have trouble getting service because they have limited English proficiency, and in somewhere, I'm located in New York City, for example, and there are hundreds of different language groups here, and people who need assistance in Farsi and in Arabic and in all sorts of, Chinese and all sorts of different languages, and that's a really enormous asset that you can bring to the table. But yeah, in terms of referrals, at Pro Bono Net, we maintain a large resource, a large guide. It's called the Volunteer Opportunities Guide. If you go to probono.net, you can click on a tab at the top, and you can, select your state and, filter by various criteria, the type of clients that you want to work with, the type of work that you want to do, your availability, et cetera. So, there's a lot of options out there. And also, I think, you want to be creative. I mean, you don't necessarily have to find something through one of these sort of formalized resources. You may come across a really fascinating organization in Google and, contact them and see if they would be interested in using your pro bono skills.
Yeah, I think that's right. We kind of forget, some of the basics there as well as the specialized resources. And I have found, talking about technology, that LinkedIn is great because you could go and put in, NGO or something like that, and you'll get people who work in those areas, and then you'll get more ideas about what those might be. So I think using the resources we've kind of started you off with, looking for your own, because you know well what it is that really most speaks to you. Did you say, Adam, that it was probono.net, or is that how you get to your?
I did.
Probono.net.
That's
okay.
Right.
All right. And people would be looking for the Volunteer Opportunities Guide. I think somebody asked about that. Okay. So we want to encourage, our audience to go ahead and ask questions that they might have. I think we're covering some great ground with our speakers, but we always like to know, what you're thinking and what you'd like to know. And while you're doing that, let me see about changing up the pace a little bit and asking, I think, maybe starting with Jessica for a couple of these quick tips and some commentary, some points you want to emphasize. Could you give us a quick start on that, Jessica?
Of course. So one thing I hear from many people who are thinking about volunteering is that they haven't done it yet. They haven't started the process because they're worried about a multitude of different things. But my first piece of advice would be don't hold back. Don't worry about whether or not you have the right experience. If you don't have experience in, say, international law, everyone is useful. Everyone has different skills to add at all stages. We work with law students. We work with young lawyers, senior lawyers, judges, law clerks. Every person out there has something to add. And sometimes we even have worked in the past with undergraduates, and they add a lot of enthusiasm, excitement, and energy, So I promise you, you will be valuable to our project, even if you haven't yet practiced law. And if you are in law school, you've already started to learn about to expand your legal knowledge. You've got probably analytical skills that will be useful on many, many projects. And the need out there is, it's great. There's a lot of need for volunteer work from attorneys. And so, whatever time you have, it's great to go ahead and reach out and get started. Kathy, would you like to jump on the next one as well?
I would in a second, but let me, we thank you to the audience. We're starting to get, some good questions. So let me capitalize on that. And here's a question that I really didn't anticipate, since we're talking about all these referral sources and you don't need to be volunteering in a practice area. There's so many things you can do. And this caller said, how common is it to apply to volunteer and then not hear back from the pro bono organization? He said that has happened to me twice, and it's easy to just throw away the concept after experiences like that. Let me assume that present company accepted, that he didn't reach out to either of your organizations, but have you heard of such stories? Because that's really disturbing.
Yeah, this is Adam. Definitely that happens. It's unfortunate, and hopefully it doesn't happen that often, but I think it's important to keep in mind that a lot of nonprofit organizations are asking for pro bono help because they're short-staffed or they're overworked or, they don't have maybe as many resources as they would like to devote to, timely returning email and such. And, I think you just have to keep talking to folks. You talk to a lot of folks. It's in some ways, it's kind of like looking for a job, but more fun. If you get, some rejections from a job, that just comes with the territory,
Or hear nothing, and so then that's not the organization for you. Then
Absolutely.
You look for the one that really does need you, want you, and is going to be responsive. There's a question I wasn't quite clear about that came in. Maybe you guys understand this better than I do. It says, how do you decide who to give pro bono to and who is just looking for free work?
Well, I think I might understand the question of whether or not, when you're looking for an organization to volunteer with, whether or not they truly need the pro bono or it's they're just trying to avoid hiring for more staff or something like that. I think that might be the question. The free work question is why I'm thinking that. And I think, look at the kind of projects and who the organization is serving. As Adam just said, a lot of organizations who do this work, NGOs and nonprofits, are short-staffed. So they are looking for help, but that doesn't mean they're looking necessarily for free work. Their model often is set up to help people, and if you look at it and talk to them a little bit, you'd know that they couldn't take their programming and services to scale and really help the number of people that they're trying to help using only, for example, paid staff and things like that. So I think you really just want to learn a little bit about the organization and a little bit about the project, and I think most of the people who run these organizations are trying to do good and really are searching for others who would like to do good as well, and who are going to be able to donate some time and help others.
All right, that helps me. I understand it better now. Let's go back, Jessica, to your second tip, if you're ready.
Of course. So one great thing about volunteering is that it never hurts to expand your network. At LWOB, for instance, we work with law firm associates and partners around the world, as well as I mentioned before, solo practitioners, government lawyers. We work with judges and with legal and non-legal organizations. The world has really become very small, and it's amazing to me how many times I will run into someone. I'll be in Africa, and I'll run into someone who knows a person who works down the street from me in D.C., and you never know when a connection is going to figure in some way, large or small, into your future or client's future. So it really, expanding your network through this kind of work, it lets you get to know people in a different way, and it really gets you out there learning and getting to know a different crowd of folks who you might not meet in your regular day-to-day practice. Okay,
that's great. Along that same line, Adam, a couple of quick tips from you.
Sure, no problem. One thing that I think of that comes to mind is that, you want to be open and enthusiastic to a variety of different opportunities. But more to the point, you don't want to sort of shut yourself down before you've even started. I hear folks say a lot of times, I don't have enough time to do pro bono work, and I think that they have the impression that it's going to be taking on a case, a family law case or something like that, and having to be in court for however many days and et cetera. And a lot of pro bono work is really not like that anymore. It's not this traditional beginning to end representation. There's a lot of limited scope volunteering opportunities, volunteer lawyer for the day projects, the opportunity to just counsel somebody briefly in a walk-in clinic. And all of that stuff's incredibly valuable. And I think if you look around, you can definitely find opportunities that fit your schedule and your availability.
And if something untoward comes up, do you work with them if somebody else has to help wrap something up? Let's say that they had good intentions, but they find they can't start, something. What happens then? Yeah, well, any organization, any pro bono program that's worth its salt is going to be, ultimately responsible for, I think, the experience of both the volunteer and the client, and should definitely be working with you to, address any needs or changes or things that you have. And absolutely. Okay. All right. I have some audience questions for each of you, but I think you had a fourth tip. Let's just finish the tips off about encouraging people just to. Oh, yeah, sure. Do something. Yeah, sure. Well, I would just say, kind of following on what you mentioned earlier, Kathy, about holiday season, and, you really want to just, it's a great opportunity to kind of start the year off on the right foot, to kind of make a New Year's resolution to do so many hours of pro bono this year. Maybe you don't know exactly what it's going to be yet, but it is just a really great time to get in that habit. Yeah, some of those big firms have that, pro bono challenge, I think, and the ABA. I think even though what we're saying is even though if you're not in an organization that sort of builds in the pro bono as part of your training or part of your professional obligations, that there's so much you can take advantage of out here, and we really wanted you to know about it. But here's a good question. Let me ask this to you, Adam, because this is, I think, an excellent question. It is, what are the risk management implications when you're helping others without reimbursement? And I guess that goes to the question of, malpractice insurance and all that stuff. Yeah, sure. So that's a really great question. It's a very important one. Different organizations handle this in different ways, but most larger organizations or court systems, et cetera, will either provide malpractice insurance for volunteers if they don't have it, or structure the attorney-client relationship in such a way that they would be covered by their firm or their organization's insurance. I know a lot of organizations that won't permit a volunteer to take on a client without making sure that they have insurance in one of those ways. So, it's because you personally don't have malpractice insurance, maybe you just come out of law school or for whatever reason are just coming back to the practice. I don't think that should discourage you. You should obviously, talk about the issue with whoever you're working with, but that shouldn't stop you. That's interesting. You mentioned coming back to the practice, too. I guess pro bono really is valuable for people looking to reenter or people who are between jobs. It's great to keep your, credentials current and all that good stuff. Jessica, let me ask you a question because it comes in about international in particular, and it refers to, the same, insurance expenses, but more than that. It says when someone volunteers for international activities, is the volunteer responsible for travel, living, and insurance expenses, or does the agency one volunteers for generally cover that?
Right, and that's an excellent question. And the answer to it, as so many good legal questions, is the answer to so many legal questions is it depends. So it depends on which organization you're volunteering with, as well as the program oftentimes. So some organizations do fund travel. And your time is what you're giving pro bono. Many organizations use self-fund, which means you do pay your cost for your travel, your lodging, and any expenses on the ground. And so that's really something that you need to work out with the organization you're talking to. And, I would say that most of our attorneys actually do come to us and are self-funders. So they do pay their way to go on these programs and to do a lot of this work. But I would have to also add that, it shouldn't stop you, I don't think, from considering international opportunities, because despite the fact that these, the travel to, say, Africa can be a few $1,000s, we still have a wait list a mile long. So there's not very many places that you can get that kind of opportunity where it's that expensive to have this kind of opportunity, and people are still just lining up around the door. So I think it's enough of a life-changing experience that oftentimes people say it's worth it, and we have many repeat volunteers. So,
people use the vacation time or, sort of their second career, encore time, right? For even if you can't afford it now or can't take the time now, right?
Of course. And, we've also had some younger folks who have crowdsourced their funding. So and I would have to remember exactly what the website is, but I know that there are some places you can crowdsource funding for international projects, and they actually got their trip paid for in that way. And a lot of times there's also fellowships or scholarships for students to cover a lot of this travel. So there's ways to get creative about it as well.
Okay, that's great. Let's go ahead, if you guys don't mind, for a minute to these sort of moments that I call agree-disagree. And I think, Jessica, let me ask you the first one. Do you kind of agree or disagree with the common wisdom, that I've heard a lot, that there are more pro bono opportunities for litigators than for transactional lawyers?
I would disagree with that, actually. I think that transactional lawyers can contribute a lot through their knowledge of corporate issues, through training, representing small businesses abroad who, maybe reviewing leases, advising international nonprofits about incorporating, helping negotiate agreements. There's a lot of work for international work for corporate practitioners as well.
All right. Well, that's good to hear. And I guess, you've been involved in training, and even people who aren't going to actually practice in corporate issues, they could do some training. They could, advise nonprofits, that type of thing. So some of it's, so to speak, pro bono legal work, and some of it is, beyond that, as we've discussed, right?
Right, and I do think so. For example, we've had training programs in the past on money laundering, and corporate lawyers are fantastic at helping us understand the issues, as well as whoever we're working with in the training understand some of the issues around financing and issues like that. So there really is a niche for every person who's looking to volunteer.
A couple of callers have asked about, speaking of niches, immigration work, and I have to assume that. And that's a good example of how do you go about finding a particular niche of work. And we've said before, Google or go to the pro bono.net or look at Jessica's list for starters. Is that right? They can find, information about immigration opportunities for pro bono volunteer work?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Adam.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say that there are definitely a ton of opportunities to do immigration work, especially, with things like immigration reform, the president's recent order, DACA, et cetera. There's a ton of folks who need help. And one resource I would recommend for this is called the Immigration Advocates Network. Their website is immigrationadvocates.org. And this is a group of organizations who have come together to sort of provide services and information for immigrants, and I think that they are a good connection to a lot of opportunities.
Okay, I had a feeling you guys would have some general and specific suggestions on that. Let me go to your agree-disagree moment, Adam, if you don't mind. You know, we've talked about, you know, an unforeseen complication, but do you think it's true that to get the most out of volunteering, people should try to handle a matter or a project from beginning to conclusion?
No, I disagree. I disagree with that. I think that, you know, it really depends. Like Jessica said, that usually is the answer. But, you know, that cannot be a good option for a lot of people. You know, it's an enormous amount of, like, responsibility and investment to take on a matter from beginning to end. And maybe, you know, you don't have the experience to do that, or you need some sort of more hands-on supervision. And so, you know, I think you really have to find the opportunity that's right for you, and they're all different kinds.
I mean, and I think, you know, nowadays with sort of legal work evolving, right, to you know, limited scope engagements and unbundled legal services, I think that would help people not be concerned that they're going to get in, you know, over their heads in terms of hours commitment. Can you, Adam, talk about, you know, what that means? Yeah,
sure. So when we say limited scope representation or unbundling legal services, basically those are just terms of art for separating out the parts of, you know, being somebody's lawyer, not taking a case from beginning to end, but maybe making signing a retainer with them to be their lawyer only for a particular hearing if you're in the volunteer lawyer for the day program, just to get them through one critical stage of their case, or agreeing only to provide them with brief advice and counsel in a clinic setting, but not to have any obligation to, you know, follow up with them or act on their behalf. There are all kinds of opportunities like that. And I would say also, just to mention that a lot of, you know, these sort of situations used to be somewhat ethically, there were a lot of questions around them, but practice rules, including the ABA model rules, have been rewritten almost everywhere to explicitly provide for these sort of situations.
You know, I think that's so interesting because somebody asked, one of the callers asked, you know, and we touched on it just a second, how important is it to volunteer in the area of your practice? And we said, you know, I think, Jessica, you said, you know, you can volunteer in other areas, or if you have no experience, even if you're a student, or you said undergrad. And, you know, in that context, you might find that you've started to volunteer for something and it's taking more time than you thought because it's not in your area of practice. And this is why I think, Adam, your advice is also so important, that you don't need to worry before you get involved about, you know, the problems that there are, because there are people, there are professionals there, like the two of you, that are going to help you manage those. Now, in that context, there's another caller, and I thought, you know, this was really sort of touching back on our issue. They mentioned the issue about free work. And my question to you, I'm going to read you the caller's question, but my question to you is, can you also say no? Like, once you've contacted an organization, can you also say no? Because this caller said that she knows several languages, and she's found that when she inquires about international pro bono work, the organization wants to use her as a translator or interpreter for the translation work and not as a lawyer, which is where she says, you know, she agrees with the other caller about free work. So what if you have these great intentions and you contact and you're making connections and relationships, but then they want you to do something like this that, you know, you weren't really focused on doing? Can you say no? Does that ruin the relationship or with the organization? Talk to us about that.
Well, I would say that no, it does not. You know, we're entering an open dialogue with the organization about how much time you have, what your areas are, you know, what your interests are. And I think it is some work to find a project that will align both your interests and needs at the same time. It's not always a case of you having to say no. Sometimes the organization might have to say not yet. We don't have an opportunity for every person at every given point in time, but we do try to keep track of the folks that have contacted us, and we definitely keep everyone in mind, and we have a database and things like that to contact those who might have the skill set when a new project comes up. And sometimes we'll reach out to folks and we'll say, this project came up, are you interested? And maybe it's not a good time for them. Maybe they're about to go to trial or something like that. And so, I think, and I would be interested if Adam has had a different experience, but we definitely have gone, back and forth with different people a bit, just trying to find the right opportunity that will work for both of us, because it's better to have an opportunity that we're all excited about and able to do than to come at it from the other angle of someone who contacts looking for one thing and ends up with something they're unhappy with and don't really have the time or energy for.
Adam, can you respond to Jessica?
Yeah, I totally second what Jessica said. You can absolutely say no. It's not like it's not a situation like where you have to ask the judge if they'll let you withdraw. You are offering to your valuable time and experience to help an organization or help their clients. And you have to find the right match, just like Jessica was saying. Something that works for you and something that works for them. And until you sort of agree to, take on a particular matter or sign some sort of retainer, you can absolutely say this might not be the right opportunity for me.
And can you call more than one, referring agency, or more than one, use more than one database, or, contact the both of you? I mean, people wonder about that with, so to speak, headhunters. Can I only work with one? Or so how does that work in terms of, not burning any bridges but looking widely?
Well, I think that you should look widely. Like I said, we might not have the right project for you at the right time, but another organization might. The one thing I would caution is if you are going to look broadly, do your best not to overcommit in terms of, if you do commit to an organization, stick with their project. If Adam was saying it might be a short project or, a discrete task. But other than that, I would say, look broadly. I don't think any of us look down on people who are trying to volunteer their services to help others. I don't think there's any downside to trying to do that in as many ways as possible.
I think that that sort of suggestion kind of gets to maybe another reason for Adam's first takeaway. And with these takeaways, we're trying to share some thoughts about things to think about more broadly and after the program too. So let me ask you, Adam, to kind of switch over to these takeaways. And your first one was think broadly about the learning potential of volunteering. How does that sort of tie into this idea of looking broadly and then serving with a focus?
Yeah, I think you can sort of take it in a lot of different directions, but I think that you just have to be, I would encourage people to be as open-minded as possible about the type of work that they're going to do, the type of opportunity that they might ultimately find really interesting. And, I think this should be really fun. I hope that, when people do pro bono work, it's because they enjoy doing it. They like helping other people, and they like feeling like their time is important and worthwhile. And, so I think that should be like the number one criteria, more so than, I only want to sort of focus in a very narrow area where I feel super expert or something like that. I think that if you find an opportunity that is fun and interesting, and you're a reasonably smart lawyer or law student, chances are you can make it work.
I guess also we hear so often that people feel they're not getting enough training or supervision, where they work. So if you're thinking broadly about the kinds of interesting, fun, enjoyable pro bono opportunities or volunteer opportunities. I guess what you're saying is that, ethically, there's always somebody that's going to supervise you, especially if it's not in your area, or even if it's a limited scope opportunity. Is that right? That you don't just get an opportunity and then just kind of get thrown in, that you can get feedback along the way and guidance? Is that how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said earlier, any organization that's sort of worth its salt should have a really quality training and supervision available to you. And if they don't, then it's probably not the right opportunity for you. And I think that it's totally fine to say that.
I mean, is that true internationally too, Jessica? Let's say you do go out of the country and you're in a different culture and you're in a different setting. Are you going to be getting that training and then possibly on the back end during and after the engagement supervision feedback?
Yeah. Of course, we work with volunteers very closely, especially those who are going to be doing international travel, in terms of preparing you for the trip. And some people do go in country alone. Sometimes they go with Lawyers Without Borders staff or with other volunteers. So you might be on your own in country, but that doesn't mean you can't give us a call at any time and with a question or anything like that. We do provide a lot of supervision and backup. There's a lot of room to be a self-starter, but we know that this is oftentimes people's first time working abroad, and so we definitely don't abandon you to the ether and say good luck. There's a lot of work both before and after that goes into each volunteer experience.
Yeah, I guess that your first tip was maybe speaking to solos who or even are used to working alone.
Mm-hmm.
Your tip about they also and others can gain camaraderie and interaction that they might miss day to day in their work.
Yes, of course. One of the programs that Lawyers Without Borders has relatively frequently is we do trainings abroad, and we often send a team of anywhere from 10 to 20 or even 30 international trainers that will go and work with folks in country. And we often get solo practitioners who are interested in joining those teams, in large part because you get the benefit of working with other people. There's skill development that happens, and just engagement with other folks. And again, this goes a little bit back to expanding your network and things like that. But I think it's also just the being able to work with folks on a day-to-day basis for a while that really brings in a lot of the solo practitioners.
And then let's go to your next tip, because there's a tie in there too.
Right, of course. So I think that it's been commonly said that when you give, you often get back more than you give. And I think that applies to knowledge as well. You're going to, for example, if you're a U.S. criminal practitioner or even in some other area, but you have some experience, you might be able to train Kenyan lawyers in laws of, say, money laundering or anti-corruption. And then what you're going to do is, in return, you're going to learn a lot about how they practice law and some of the challenges they face. And you might find that they have come up with some very creative solutions to some legal problems that are relatively universal. So, there's that aspect to it. You might even come up with an interesting talk or an article about the experiences and the comparison between our law and the law in other countries is really a fascinating way to start thinking creatively in your own practice. So I do think that you share things but you also do learn a lot in return. And
I think that it's kind of interesting for people to think about, kind of sharing what they've learned, kind of repurposing what they've learned afterward. You see people doing that?
I've definitely seen folks who, expand their practice perhaps into, a slightly new area, or more often to expanding into more pro bono work as well at home, because you can't travel internationally every week, unfortunately. So folks do use a lot of their knowledge to expand that. And some folks, especially, people at law firms, might even be able to make client contacts and things like that. So that's another way that it can help on that end.
Yeah, and I guess, if people are always wondering, what can I speak about, what can I write about, that you can get your name out there even for the work that you're doing that you're not paid for, right? That even if you're not looking to be that kind of lawyer, it's still, I think, an opportunity for you to, make a name for yourself. Did you see, see what I'm saying about that? Am I right?
Yeah, I think so too, and I think that, again, you're going to meet folks who are doing this work, and it'll get your name out there with other folks in the U.S. or we often work with folks in the U.K. as well who might be doing the similar work, and also, it's an interesting thing to be able to talk to folks about when you get home. So I do think it helps on a couple of different levels.
That's interesting. Adam, I guess now let's take your last tip, because people may be thinking, okay, this is a lot of good information. It's kind of overwhelming. How am I going to find the right opportunity, et cetera? So your tip is?
Yeah, so it's not as hard as you think. People like Jessica and I, we're here to help you find chances to help other folks. And there are all sorts of resources like the ones we've been talking about on Pro Bono or Immigration Advocates or the various avenues that Lawyers Without Borders provides. And if you're looking something and we can't point you directly to it, we probably know somebody who can. So, I think that as kind of a theme that I think we've both been harping on throughout this is, don't be too afraid. Don't not try because you think it's just going to be a real hassle. In a lot of cases, it's way easier than you think.
I think smoother, interesting, because people, I think they're a little leery, but we want to encourage everybody. Being the holidays, this is kind of our gift to you as well, whether you want local or traditional research assignments or you want a global game-changing role. I mean, it runs the spectrum, and partly this is why we wanted to introduce you to Adam and Jessica today, and I hope, that you've gotten quite a lot out of it. What I want to do, in addition, as we close, to thanking, both Jessica Ryckman and Adam Friedl so much, and our audience for listening in and asking questions, is encourage the audience to stay on the line and fill in a quick evaluation for us, because we always need to know what your thoughts are. And we also want to give you some thoughts about ABA resources going forward. You have your slides. I'm having a little trouble advancing them, but there's the ABA resource page about this series itself, which I want you to continue to go and look at. Right, there we go. www.ambar.org, AMBAR for American Bar, .org/advice, and there you're going to see not only the information on the various upcoming programs, but you'll see the archived past programs, and you can not only get into them and listen if you're an ABA member, at no charge, but also to see the course materials that went along with each of them. And again, we're not trying to be comprehensive on the course materials. This is not a CLE, but it's, to give you a taste of what you can think about and where you can go, to look. And, in that regard, visiting this website, you can go ahead even now and sign up for the next program. We hope that a lot of you are regulars, and if you haven't been, we'll look ahead. But January, as we kick off 2015, is going to be on trial tips from practice masters. So it's a lot of fun. And also, even if you're not a litigator or trial lawyer, sometimes in transactional work you want to know, what's ahead if things go south. And so this is a good, fun program that'll be for everybody, we promise you. And not only that, but what we've done kind of in response to some of your questions is we've looked ahead to plan out our programming through the whole next bar year, which ends in August. But you can see some amazing topics because we try to have some of them be nuts and bolts and some of them be, even other disciplines. February, we kind of thought, even going along with, almost Valentine's Day, emotional intelligence, why it matters to lawyers, what is it, what you need to know. If you're between jobs, moving forward after a job loss, because everybody, I think, is either between jobs or think they may be at some point. That's just the nature of our mentality as lawyers. So that's for everybody as well. April showers, making rain to grow your business. We think it's always important to think about other skills like that. May in May, being a great supervisor, and that'll help people who are supervised by others to help their supervisors be excellent, going on strategically building your reputation, not only just to develop business, but in general, even if you're not in a law firm, switching sectors for a better fit, and then last, for yourself, for you, negotiating work perks that matter. And so we ask that you think about our series and also think about all the ABA resources, because this series is sponsored by the ABA Career Center, and they have lots of job opportunities and email alerts, and you can put your resume up and whatnot. So there's all kinds of interesting, ways for you to gain more information and more access and more opportunity. So again, on behalf of the ABA and myself, please stay on the line to fill in our quick evaluation. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Jessica. We, again, hope you'll be with us in the future, and we wish you happy holidays all. Thanks.